Hey, good evening, everybody. This post will be about Dak Prescott. Now, a lot of you here are football fans, and whether you like him or you hate him, Dallas Cowboys are always in the news. Now, I grew up being a Dallas Cowboys fan. I have other posts, I have other threads about the Cowboys. And I guess you can say I kind of still am, but not at all to the point I used to be because I'm just not as thrilled with the NFL as I used to like it back in days of yesteryear, Staubach and Troy Aikman, Danny White, Dorsett, and all that stuff. But the one I talk about is Dak Prescott because there's a lot of spotlight on him simply because he's the Cowboys quarterback. There's a lot of things that look good about Dak Prescott. Generally speaking, his stats are pretty darn good. So there's a lot of questions. Is this guy a top level quarterback? Is he in the same boat as Mahomes and some of the other young quarterbacks that are out there? Is he like that? I say no. Now, I like Dak Prescott. He seems to be a very upstanding guy, and he gives his all in his heart to the Cowboys organization. He suffered that injury several years ago. He was very sad about it. He wanted to come back. I like Dak Prescott, but I just do not think that he is a top-level quarterback. I think he's a good quarterback. Within the right system, he could take you to a couple of playoff wins. I just don't think he's the guy to take you to the Super Bowl, especially with the Dallas Cowboys, who are very dysfunctional with their owner. I've had another thread about that. Let's talk about that for Dak Prescott and why. Let me back myself up. Dak Prescott, as I said, has pretty darn good stats. He had pretty darn good stats last year. He's had them for the last couple of years. Among the best in the NFL, his stats. You just look at pure raw stats, pretty darn good. Okay, average about 66% passing, a lot more TDs and interceptions in the recent seasons, and he's always had more. But that's pretty darn good stuff. This guy is, stats wise, pure stats wise, last couple of years is as good as anybody else. Now, I know there's 17 games added a game, but he had a great season last year. 37 touchdowns, threw for a lot of yards. Racked up. The Cowboys were the highest scoring team in the league last year. The only team scored over 500 points. They were the highest scoring team in the league. But not everything is as it seems. See, Dak Prescott is the master of the empty calories yards. Ever since he's been in the league, withstanding his first year, which I thought he was very good, he was very consistent throughout the season. He really was. He didn't have super amount of yards, but they ran very well in the first year. He was very consistent in most games. He had a 13-3 season, did very, very well, even though they lost the first playoff game. After that, Dak Prescott is the master of, of the foolery. This guy is so good in certain circumstances and so bad when it really counts. I'll give you an example. I got stats here. So his career record as a starter in 85 games is 53-32, 67% winning percentage. Basically, 2 out of every 3 games he wins. 53-32. That's pretty good stuff. His record against non-winning teams is 36-9, but his record against winning teams is 17-23. Okay? Now, if you want to look at the stats and delve into them, here's what Dak Prescott is about. Dak Prescott is one of the best against the losing teams. He racks it up against the losing teams. Let's just look at last year, for example. Dallas went 12-5 in the 17-game schedule. Prescott rolled almost 50 points against the Eagles the first time, over 50 the second time. Okay? He did the same against the Giants, rolled 56 points against Washington. And a non-playoff team, Atlanta, he had 35 in the first half alone. Against a non-playoff contending teams last year. In the second game against Philadelphia, keep in mind that the last game of the year when they rolled up like 51 or 2 points, Eagles had all the second stringers in, all by I think 3 players. And the Cowboys had a lot of their starters in. Of course, that's going to happen. Nevertheless, Prescott against Atlanta in his division last year, none of which were championship level, racked it up. Okay, if you look at those 500 and something points, it was all accomplished against non-playoff caliber talent. If you look at his stats and what he did against playoff caliber teams last year, it was Jekyll and Hyde. It's been like that through most of his career. He racks up 50-something points against Philadelphia, and the next week in San Francisco, he only has 7 for 3 quarters. Arizona did only won but one game in their last 5 to include the playoffs. It was against Dallas, and he had like I think 3 points after 3 quarters. Prescott is good about packing in under prevent defenses. A couple years ago, give you case in point, Cleveland Browns were annihilating the Cowboys after 3 quarters in Dallas, 41-14. Game was over. Final ends up being like 48-38. The Cowboys racked up 24 points alone in the fourth quarter. Prescott had almost 300 yards alone in the fourth quarter. Wound up with about 450 or 60 yards. Look at that. If you look at the box score of that game, you're like, yeah, the Cowboys lost, but boy, Prescott was awesome. That was a great game, 48-38. No, it wasn't. That was all junk crap in the fourth quarter. Empty calories. That game was over. The Browns never were in any threat of losing it. And Prescott, with under a prevent defense of the Browns, who were playing very soft, got all his yards when the game was done. Couldn't do anything the first 3 quarters. I've seen this happen again and again with this guy. And it just literally puffs up his stats against the Broncos last year, which wasn't even a playoff team. Dallas was at home and losing 30-0 after 3 quarters. They were terrible. They didn't have 100 yards of offense. Fourth quarter comes, the game is over. Prescott throws 2 touchdowns, a couple of 2-point conversions, over 200 yards in the fourth quarter alone. Winds up 30-16. You look at the box score, you say, oh, it was a pretty competitive game. No, it wasn't. It was 30-0 after 3 quarters. I've seen this guy do this again and again against winning teams. He looks like garbage for the first 3 quarters. And then when the Cowboys are out of the game, he comes back, throwing under the coverage, dink and dunk stuff, moving down the field. Because the defenses today aren't like they were in the days of yesteryear. They're not as tough because they can't be with the regulations. Everything's offensive. They don't have the depth they had with free agency. So therefore, you don't have the Bears, the old Steelers, the old Cowboys, the old Redskins and Giants who would strangle you to the end. The Bears wanted to get shutouts all the time. They didn't care how far they were ahead. These teams today, they're far ahead of you. They're going to trade points for time, yards for time, and Prescott takes advantage of that. If you look at his stats, especially through 3 quarters against the winning teams that he's had a losing record against versus the losing teams he has a winning record against, you're going to see an incredible difference. Now, that happens with everybody who has winning and losing records. I get that. But it's really prevalent with Prescott. It's like night and day. All right? What counts is what you do against teams when games are in the line, position of playoffs are in the line, and playoff games, of which he's won 1. The only game I ever saw him play when it really counted for a playoff position or in the playoffs was the game they won against Seattle several years ago. His only playoff win, I think 23-21 or something. He wasn't great, but he did what he had to do. He ran, I think, for a touchdown at the end and played solid. That's the only game since he's been in the league that I can say he really rose up when needed to. Other than that, this guy packs his best games over and over every season against bottom feeders, racks up 50 points here, 45 points, 400 yet. And then he comes in next week against a team that's actually good, and he got 7 points in 3 quarters. Same 49ers game in the playoffs. It wound up a little close to the end, mostly because Jimmy Garoppolo kind of let him get back in. But 7 points. The only team to lose at home in the first round last year in 6 games was Dallas, and they were pathetic through 3 quarters. Now, there are other factors other than that. The Cowboys have a lot of self-destructive tendencies, penalties, very poor coaching. But you can't say that Prescott has not had, since he's been in the league, especially the last couple of years, you cannot make the excuse he hasn't had the weaponry. He's had the equipment, okay? Last year alone, that team last year, on paper, on talent, was much more talented than the Cincinnati Bengals who went to the Super Bowl, without a doubt. Okay? 10-7 Bengals and 12-5 Cowboys. Say what you want. Last year, the Cowboys had CeeDee Lamb, okay, Cooper, Gallup, decent tight end. Even though it's not the best, it's still a pretty decent offensive line. And 2 running backs supposed to be given a 1-2 punch, even though I know Elliott, I believe, is overpaid. Yeah, Elliott and Pollard. Pollard is not overrated. They had an offense last year that was better than most teams in the league. Prescott's had weapons. You can't say that he hasn't. He's had speed at wide receiver since he's been in the league. And last year, that Cowboys, they even had a defense that was, it wasn't the best, but it was very good. It was number 1 at taking turnovers and scoring defensive touchdowns, leading the league by far in interceptions with 27. Okay, that team last year was better than a lot of teams, I believe, that were in the playoffs, and they couldn't even get by round 1. It's not just Prescott, but he's got some of that blame's got to go on him. He falls asleep against good teams 3 quarters, and all of a sudden look at the way he almost brought him back. You're at home, Arizona, a couple of games before when it was playing, and you have 3 points after 3 quarters. You get 7 after 3 quarters in the playoff games to the 49ers at home. This is a consistent thing all the time with him against the good teams. And then he plays the bad ones. He racks 35 in the first half. Looks like Superman. Oh, this guy's so great. I like Dak Prescott. I think he's an upstanding guy. I think in the right system, this guy needs everything. He's not one of those guys he's not going to be the guy who's going to make all the difference. He's the guy with everything everything correctly. He can probably get you a playoff point or 2, but I just don't think this guy is ever going to do that with Dallas. And you know what? I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I mean, this is a very important year for him and the Cowboys. This is his 7th season in the league. Okay, there's no more excuses. He's closing in on 30. He's got a running back who's also in a very, very big year for him as well. Running backs don't last like the days of Emmitt Smith, Walter Payton, and John Williams, who had his best season at the age of 34. That stuff's over. You start getting past, you draft a running back, and it's 5 straight years he plays for you. Start getting 6th, 7th, 8th year. You know, what you get out of him is, you're lucky if you get top play. A lot of times they're burnt out. And Elliott does not look at his best. So this is a very important year for Prescott. He's talking how he's in best shape and he feels good and all this. All right, well, at some point, you're going to have to go to the next level. Okay? Just go putting 50 points on the bottom feeders all the time. That doesn't cut it anymore. Okay? Put 50 points against the bottom feeder, come back and put 10 points against a good team. No, that's not going to cut it. Okay? Rather see you put 30 points against the bottom feeder and 28 against a good team and win them both. But it's not like that with him. Consistently, he is the biggest Jekyll and Hyde quarterback when it comes to playing non-winning teams versus winning teams. In the number one, that's the one thing I have against him. And he has false stats. A lot of yards and touchdowns when the game is way out of reach for Dallas. And he starts going under the coverage, taking what the defense gives him, padding all those stats. And at the end of the season, look at how good this guy's stats were. No. You got to look at it when the meat of the game is there, when you need to make the plays to win the game. That's what makes a great quarterback. And I don't see him being great. He's good. He's not great. And the Cowboys need great if they're going to ascend. And they just don't have it, in my opinion. That's my comment today about Dak Prescott. Upstanding man, puts his heart and soul in the game. I think he's good. I don't think he's a top-tier quarterback. I don't think he'll ever be, especially with the Dallas Cowboys. Rick here. God bless. Have a great night.